A boy with no powers in a group full of heroes is kicked out because he's useless and not much help to the team. Now, he has nowhere to go, no money to spare, and it seems he's also terrible at any combat skill. A boy recounts the story of Fenrir, an S-level monster capable of single-handedly destroying a large city. Once, a village that was constantly attacked by this beast spent all its money to hire the boy's group, the Blazing Dragon Fangs. On that fateful night, Fenrir suddenly appeared out of nowhere and flung a boy who was watching the team's movements far into the air. The leader of the Blazing Dragon Fangs commanded Bandana to spring into action. She then shot her metallic cable around the beast's body to trap it. However, Fenrir bit the cable and hurled the girl against the wall, causing a severe injury. The group's healer quickly sprang into action to restore their ally. Back in the fight, Bandana immobilized the wolf again, allowing the leader to strike the beast with his flaming sword, setting it ablaze and securing victory for the team. According to the boy narrating the story, Bandana was the Swift Ranger, Marlefis the Priestess, and Golnova the Fiery Warrior. After defeating Fenrir, the Blazing Dragon Fangs became local heroes. The boy who was removed from the fight at the outset, and who tells us about this battle, believes his story is somewhat unusual, that of a powerless man among heroes, performing menial tasks on a journey to save the world. After their well-deserved victory, the team enjoyed a hearty meal. However, after biting into a piece of meat, Golnova declared it trash and tossed it away, complaining about the village's poor food quality. The youngest boy hurried to clean up the mess the leader had made, so Golnova demanded that Kerr cook something decent for him. With a smile, the young lad assured he would handle it, while Bandana noted they should enjoy it as it would be their last meal from Kerr. The young boy, puzzled, asked what they meant by that, to which Golnova bluntly stated the kid was too slow to realize he was being fired, as he was so feeble he couldn't even kill a cramping slime pup. Marlefis reminded him that according to the laws of this world, teams must consist of 4 members, meaning if they truly wanted to become stronger, they needed to recruit a high-level mage to raise the team's caliber. Not missing the chance for a pun, Bandana pointed out that although Kerr might carry their baggage, he was ironically the biggest baggage of all. As a last resort, Kerr literally begged the leader for mercy to stay on the team, but Golnova kicked him in the stomach and told him to shut up. Following this, Kerr reflected that his story was all too common, that of a powerless boy who traveled with strong heroes until he was dismissed and had nowhere else to go. After hitching a ride on a cart, Kerr arrived in a city with just a few coins from his last salary in the newly promoted SS rank team, Blazing Dragon Fangs, and went to the Hallow Work branch to find a job. Upon entering, he was startled to be welcomed by an employee to the Samela branch of Hallow Workstation. As the boy was looking for employment, she explained he needed to undergo an interview and an aptitude test. Sitting down to begin the process, he was asked for his name and age, which he provided as Kurt Rawkins, 15 years old. Answering further questions, he was born in Haste Village in the Sheen Mountains and worked as a jack of all trades for the recently promoted SS rank team, Blazing Dragon Fangs. Although he had been fired, the employee believed having this service on his resume was a significant advantage for him, making Kerr feel grateful that Golnova and his former teammates had afforded him this opportunity. Next, Kurt had to undergo an aptitude test, which was a talent granted to him by God, in an attempt to discover his hidden talents. Aptitudes ranged from G rank to SSS, and these levels distinguished the boys from the men, as while a D rank might not cut steel with a certain sword, an A rank could possibly do so using the same blade. Kurt hoped for a major turnaround in his life with this test, but the results indicated he was no higher than G rank in all respects. In summary, the boy was a total underachiever and likely destined for some routine 6x1 shift life. But the woman remembered they hadn't tested his forging and alchemy capabilities because the technician wasn't present, so Kerr would have to wait about a week to see if he was good at that. The problem was that the boy didn't have enough money to stay in the city for that long, so she thought of another test and asked him to lift a sandbag that was in the room. Upon touching the bag, Kerr felt his mana being drained, and he managed to lift the object, but the weight caused his back to bend forward. Nevertheless, the test administrator stated he should be strong enough to handle some construction jobs. Speaking of which, a border town in the Margraviate of Takon was looking for people to repair its walls, and Kerr was pleased to have found a job. Later, as he approached the construction foreman with the introduction letter he had been given, the man glanced at the lad's frail frame and doubted his capability. But since he was short on personnel, it would have to do. Thus, he passed the instructions to Kerr to make cement and repair the wall. Kerr was about to ask if he should infuse the cement with mana to strengthen it, but he was cut off by the foreman, who would return in 3 hours to check on the situation and expected the worker to have used at least half a barrel by then, with payment depending on performance. As he watched his boss leave, Kerr reflected that infusing mana was such a common procedure that the man probably didn't think it necessary to explain. Honestly, he was surprised that half a barrel was considered enough. But regardless, he promised to give his best in this job. 3 hours later, the boss came back to check in and was utterly astounded by what the kid had accomplished. Kerr apologized, having run out of cement, but that was hardly the issue. In reality, the fellow Kurt Rockins had managed to repair a third of the massive western wall in just that short time. Disbelieving, the adult questioned how the boy reached the higher parts without any scaffolding or ladders nearby, and Kerr explained that he put the cement on the end of a very long stick. Conceding after initially underestimating the skinny kid, the boss asked how much longer the young man planned to work there. Kerr confessed that staying for a week would be ideal. With that, the man let the employee off and handed him a bag of coins, the most he had on him, promising to pass on the rest later. Kerr was stunned to receive so much money, being used to just scraps from his former group, and it greatly motivated him. 3 days later, like the boss, everyone passing by the north and west walls could see and were incredulous at how quickly they were repaired. That day, the contractor told Kerr that he didn't need to come from tomorrow onwards, as the kid had simply fixed the entire wall, leaving those who relied on that work for food out of a job. Nevertheless, as a small consolation, the man noted that Kurt's performance was of a typical SS rank for this type of job, so he gave the rest of the payment to the boy and recommended that he look for another job in the capital. Interestingly, despite his excellent performance, Kurt returned to Hallow feeling like a failure, as he felt ultimately kicked out. In the middle of another conversation with the clerk, he saw a beautiful girl causing trouble with an attendant. Kerr's interviewer went over to settle the dispute and learned that the customer wanted to hire a miner but insisted on paying based on good results without any advance payment for a mountain, with no guarantees. Since that was the case, the employee suggested the client recruit investors to develop the mine, but she argued that the mountain would be confiscated if she didn't pay the taxes within a week. Interrupting the dialogue uninvited, Kurt offered to do the job, as he always dug in the mines of his village. But the contractor was not pleased with the worker's ant-like physique, preferring a burly dwarf with a tough look. The problem was, as the employee informed, the woman would have to shell out 10 silver coins for the dwarf, which she made it clear she was unwilling to do, so the deal was to take this kid instead. Finally, after the client left dissatisfied with her new employee, the workstation clerk commented to her colleague that Kurt was too nice. With that adorable look, he could easily work in some leisure lodging, if you catch my drift. Hearing that nonsense, the friend asked Miss Kershell to get a grip and handed her the card with the rest of the payment that the boy was supposed to receive for the wall repair. The woman glanced at the value of 200 coins and flipped out, so much so that she lost her balance and fell backward after tripping over the sandbags that Kerr had lifted. In fact, the colleague remarked that those weren't sandbags, but rather bags used to measure a person's mana, and they get heavier the more magical energy a person has, though they usually don't react to ordinary people. Actually, it takes mana at the level of a court mage to activate those bags. Hearing this, Kershell picked up the bag and felt the weight, though not too much. At the moment, she remembered Kurt struggling greatly to lift that thing and began to wonder just who this guy was. Speaking of the man, he was led to work in a more remote area where there was just a small tent, where he and the boss were supposed to sleep together, according to her. Kurt stated that he couldn't share a tent with a woman as beautiful as Miss Ulyssia. This statement left the woman utterly embarrassed, thinking the kid was mocking her, but Kurt assured her that he had never seen anyone as beautiful as her in his extensive life of 15 years. Ulyssia didn't want to hear it and told the boy to stop talking. Soon after, she mentioned that she had been an adventurer since she was 10 years old, so there was no way she could be considered beautiful. With that, she handed the employee some poorly wrapped food, and Kurt thought it was great, considering it had been a long time since anyone had cooked anything for him. He thought to himself that Golnova and the others never ate with him, unlike this new boss who seemed pretty cool. At night, lying awake, the boy couldn't sleep and decided to turn to see if the boss lady had fallen asleep. When he laid eyes on the boss, he noticed she was only wearing underwear on the lower part of her body, forcing the poor kid to cover his mouth to muffle the squeak he let out. After that, he lamented that Ulysses was so naive. After all, he was a man. Pretending to be asleep, the woman thought to herself that she had used exactly that strategy to find out if Kurt was the type to attack her. But he turned out to be really nice, as well as handsome and fun to tease. The next day, she found out that her employee had slept outside the tent all night and noticed that he had fixed the button on her coat. Grateful, Ulysses thought maybe Kurt was in the wrong job. But since he was there, she announced that they would start work soon, as she needed to earn 10 gold coins that week. For that, she planned to start digging somewhere nearby. But Kurt pointed out that she wouldn't find any ore if she just dug randomly, and that it would be better if he took a look to see if he could find something. As the boss finally gave in, the miner discovered a crystal that alone must be worth about 3 gold coins. Some time later, Kurt examined the surrounding rocks in record time and extracted a large quantity of crystals. Impressed, the boss asked if the next step was to sell these items, but he explained that all but the first were too small to be of much value. The real deal was to transform them into magical crystals. Ulysses thought there were fewer than 10 magical artisans in the kingdom capable of this service, but in a matter of seconds, her new employee performed the process with monstrous ease, usually taking an hour to complete. As night approached, Ulysses bid the boy farewell to sell the magical crystals and planned to return the next morning, while Kurt decided to stay and do some things around there. Watching the boy wave goodbye, the woman struggled not to melt from the cuteness of the lad. Upon arriving in town to sell the items, Ulysses was asked at the counter about the documents for selling foreign crystals, but she informed them that these were produced domestically. Confused, the soldier asked which workshop she belonged to, so she showed a necklace proving she was an adventurer directly serving the royal family. With that, she gained access to a teleportation stone to go to the capital. Since Ulysses was a former adventurer who served the royalty, these people wouldn't believe her even if she told the truth. Next, Ulysses visited a friend and asked her to buy some of the crystals. The girl assessed that the shine of one of the sample pieces wasn't very strong, so it probably wasn't worth much, perhaps about 10 silver. Ulysses had anticipated some negative surprise due to the short time Kurt needed to imbue mana into the items, but suddenly, the buyer reevaluated the crystals and decided she was willing to pay 10 gold just for that crystal, because it contained 10 times more mana than usual, and the shine wasn't strong because the crystal had been treated to prevent mana leakage from inside. Having 50 crystals, the buyer placed a bag with 500 gold on the counter without hesitation, but asked for 2 things from her friend. Firstly, she must not sell these magical crystals anywhere but in this store, as it would not be in the kingdom's interest to have such powerful crystals circulating regularly on the market. Secondly, she asked Ulysses to disclose who performed the mana imbuing process on these items, but Kurt's boss refused to provide employee information without his permission. At this, with a mild show of authority, the shop owner reminded her that she was a court mage with the status of an honorary count, meaning this was an order. However, Ulysses argued that she no longer served the royal family and did not have to obey such an order, so the friend gave up and only asked her to ensure that the responsible party did not leave the country, and to inform him that she was offering him the position of director of a royal magical technology research laboratory, with the title of honorary baron or even honorary count. After leaving the store, Ulysses tried to grasp how she had just acquired 500 gold and how that boy could become a count out of nowhere. Unable to get it out of her head, she returned to the workstation to ask Kershil about Kurt. Interestingly, the clerk also wanted to know a few things about this boy. Initially, she tried to protect the client's privacy, but when Ulysses showed her crest, the girl revealed that Kurt was from the Blazing Dragon Fangs, but had been fired and now had earned 200 gold by fixing a wall alone in the Margraviate of Takon. Speaking of money, the former adventurer asked the employee to deposit 499 gold in Kurt's account and ordered her not to divulge any information about the boy. Hours later, Ulysses returned to where her miner was and discovered that he had built a wooden house on the site in less than a day. She asked him about it, and the boy found it normal, explaining that people usually do this in his hometown. In the next moment, we see the Flaming Dragon Fangs group struggling against a gigantic creature. Golnova asks to be healed after sustaining injuries in battle, but Marlefus simply cannot do it. As he blocks the attacks from the evil tree, the leader asks if the newcomer can't use fire magic, but the boy complains that Golnova himself said he was capable of it. Overhearing the argument from outside, Bandana thinks to herself that this group is finished. Following this, Kurt is shocked to learn that they want him to be the director of the Royal Magic Technology Lab, meaning he'll receive noble treatment. Ulycia explains that the person she asked to evaluate the magic crystals serves as a royal court mage as a hobby. Thus, Kurt acknowledges it's a great offer, but ultimately declines. Internally, he reflects that he can't see himself in a role that places him above others, besides feeling bad for the Flaming Dragon Fangs. Outwardly, he argues to his friend that his main role is to work there, and then asks if the sale of the crystals was enough to cover the taxes. She responds that she sold them for a great price, but it wasn't her who created them. In fact, she took some gold as a handling fee and deposited the rest into Kurt's account. He thinks it wasn't necessary, but Ulycia insists it was, as she would feel too guilty accepting such a large sum. In any case, the woman plans to continue mining and counts on the young man to stand by her in this, and Kurt is immediately enthusiastic, especially since he found what seems to be a promising mineral vein yesterday. However, the boss is concerned about how many hours he rested, and he informs her that he slept 6 hours. To her astonishment, since he built a house by himself and slept so little, Kurt thinks she's upset because he slept too much, given that he used to sleep only 4 hours a day with the Flaming Dragon Fangs. Therefore, he promises to make up for the excessive sleep. After their conversation, Kurt takes the woman to an area he believes is good for mining. Ulycia confesses she doesn't see anything special, so he explains that, considering the mountain's topography, there must be a mineral deposit below, but Ulycia should not dig deeper than 50 meters. She thought they would dig together, so the employee explains that he plans to dig around the area where he found that large crystal yesterday. Hours later, the boss finds a very valuable topaz and screams with joy, assessing that it must be worth about 3 gold coins, especially since Kurt will turn it into a magic crystal for free if she asks, which would help her meet her target. With this in mind, she feels a spark of passion for the miner, but quickly scolds herself to push that feeling away. With a smile plastered on her face, Ulycia follows Kurt Rawkins, imagining that by now he has made an entire mining tunnel. Indeed, the kid had simply built a mine in the meantime. Ulycia enters and notices the excessive brightness, then wonders if they don't need lanterns because of the glowing moss. Either way, she freaks out when she realizes the tunnel is huge in a surreal way, and it was supposed to be impossible for that kid to manage to open such a large one in so little time. At that moment, the aforementioned arrives and laments that all he extracted were useless stones, along with small fragments of the mineral he's looking for. Ulycia takes a look at the useless stones, but acknowledges that they actually look pretty nice. Kurt agrees, but since they are plentiful, those mithril stones don't have much value. Upon hearing this name, the boss is incredulous. After all, mithril is not only more valuable than gold, but it's even more expensive than platinum. Curiously, Kurt mentions that this stuff is so common in the village he came from that people throw it away. Startled, Ulycia asks what mineral he was looking for, and he replies that it's orichalcum. The woman recalls that this is the legendary mineral known as the Metal of the Gods, and she didn't even know it existed in this mountain. Holding a sample, Rawkins mentions that it's possible to extract this thing anywhere, but only if you can dig very deep into the soil. Now unsure what to think, the woman asks if this guy managed to dig that much in 8 hours and then return to the surface, and he responds yes, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. And not only did he open the hole, but he also closed it because it was too dangerous to leave it open. That said, she attentively observes the surroundings and notes that the employee crossed the entire mountain with his tunnel. Finally, 2 days later, Kurt finishes mining and returns to Samela with Ulycia, and the tunnel he opened was capable of connecting this city with the city of Lord Takon. Therefore, Ulycia allows members of the Merchants Guild to use it in exchange for a maintenance fee, and the woman will be able to cover the taxes with this money. At some point, while walking on the street, Kurt is approached by Bandana, who tells him that she is no longer part of the Flaming Dragon Fangs after several things happened. She recalls that one day, Golnova ate at a popular restaurant and left without paying the bill because he thought the food was terrible. When he met Bandana on the street, he wanted to know if they still had the smoked meat Kurt had made, but she remembers that the team leader ate it all. Hearing this, the man points his sword at the subordinate and orders her to bring the kid back, and that it's okay to hurt him a bit if he refuses to cook. Calmly, Bandana assures that she will do what she can and, using her speed, she borrows the teleportation crystal from the boss without asking. After leaving the alley where she found Golnova, she sees guards looking for him because of the trouble at the restaurant, and thinks that Marlefus was lucky to have been called by the church. In the end, she was right. The group ended up going down the drain, and Bandana decides to visit the leader only when she feels like it. Reflecting on this, Bandana decides to put the whole ordeal aside and simply says she was dismissed, as she doesn't want her surveillance target to get tangled in this mess either. Hearing this, Kurt regrets not being able to return to Dragon Fangs right now. After all, he greatly admires Golnova and feels deeply indebted to him. Eventually, Bandana mentions that she knows someone from a workshop who needs assistance. According to her, there are only 15 Aetlier Meisters with official permission in the country, and one of these significant figures is in trouble. It would be helpful if Kurt could lend a hand. Surprised and delighted to be considered useful, the young man eagerly agrees to help, and the woman gives him the address, prompting him to dash off towards the location. Left alone, Bandana thinks that being an apprentice to the Great Sage is no easy task. On his way to the mission, Kurt recalls that the workshops known as Aetliers are facilities that mainly produce and sell medicines, magic swords, magical devices, and similar items. The head of an officially sanctioned Aetlier is known as an Aetlier Meister and is authorized to develop these sites and is treated as a viscount in terms of status. Honestly, the boy had no idea that such a person existed in this city. Soon, he arrives at the address written on the paper Bandana gave him. The house seems quite ordinary, but a sign reads Aetlier Ophelia. When he knocks, a very young girl, surely too young to be considered a master, answers the door. Seeing the human's astonished face, the girl thinks he's acting this way because he's not used to dealing with elves, so the boy explains that it's not the case and asks if she is the master of the Aetlier. She tells him she is just Michelle Lalacata, the boss's assistant. Kurt says he came to help on Miss Bandana's recommendation, and the assistant, thrilled to finally have some help, pulls him inside. Upon reaching the place of contention, Kurt pinches his nose due to the foul smell. It turns out they needed someone to clean the kitchen, and Kurt grimaces bitterly upon realizing he would never be considered useful in assisting directly in the Aetlier. Then, Michelle is called by the boss, leaving the boy alone with the mess. Without hesitation, he pounds his chest, dons an apron, and cleans up the entire mess in 30 minutes. Unsure what to do next, he follows the path Michelle had taken and goes after her, until he knocks on a door where he receives permission to enter. But inside is a girl wearing less clothing than appropriate. Confused, she asks who he is, and Kurt introduces himself in a startle, apologizing for entering under these circumstances. Not minding much, the lady informs him that Lady Ophelia has gone to the basement. At that moment, Kurt notices a curse mark on the girl's belly and asks to take a closer look. With her permission, he touches the mark and sees that she feels no pain, likely because the curse has consumed so much of her that she hardly feels it anymore. At least, her stomach still works because it growls ominously. Therefore, Kurt offers to prepare some light food for her. Arriving in the kitchen, he realizes he was touching the body of a naked woman and blushes, and the distraction causes him to trip over a stool in the middle of the path and fall face down. Meanwhile, Ulyssia is in a meeting with her friend from the court, wanting to know what the value would be. The purple-haired girl offers 50,000 gold for the mithril and orichalcum, which makes the businesswoman sweat from the amount of money mentioned. She questions what Mimiko thinks will happen if they find out Kurt Rawkins exists, and Mimiko bluntly replies that the boy could easily be kidnapped or even killed. Honestly, she has no idea how such a monstrous kid has remained anonymous for so long. Ulyssia mentions that he was fired from the Flaming Dragon Fangs, which reminds Mimiko that the leader of this group is being sought by the authorities. She wants to know what her friend plans to do with the boy from now on, and Ulyssia hopes to place him in the position of Aetlier Meister, as limiting his actions would be better than him standing out. Moreover, she herself wanted to be hired as a guard, but has no idea how to make him accept this, as the boy has no clue of his real capabilities. Speaking of the boy, Kurt was calmly preparing the meal until he notices the arrival of Michelle along with a tall woman, and both are impressed with the cleanliness of the kitchen. He asks if she is Lady Ophelia, which she confirms. The boy apologizes for using the kitchen without permission to make this porridge, explaining that there was a girl in the back room who was hungry. Surprised that he had met the girl, the master makes it clear that the boy should not speak of her to anyone, and Kurt promises to keep quiet. Thus, Ophelia pays him a generous sum for today's service and asks him to come back tomorrow at the same time. When Kurt leaves, the master regrets having allowed that girl to have contact with strangers, as she must do everything to prevent the curse from worsening. Then, Ophelia goes to the room of the said girl with the meal and asks her not to open the curtains the way she was doing at that exact moment, as someone might see her. Noticing that the young girl's clothing is too loose, the master kneels to see how she might adjust the pajamas, until she hears the girl's stomach rumble loudly and bursts into laughter. Then, she gets up to check if her food is poisoned, but the young girl thinks it is unnecessary, as if it was that boy who made it. Her intuition says he has a good heart and would do no harm. Besides, she is already a wreck because of the curse, and it would not be necessary for any poison to finish her at this point. Speaking of which, not knowing who cast this curse on her, the girl confesses that she has spent her life suspecting everyone. But today, at least, she would like to trust someone to the end. Having said that, she smells the delightful scent of the porridge and imagines that the cook must have added herbs. With the first spoonful, she falls in love with the flavor and feels her heart warm up. Seeing that everything is okay, Ophelia is relieved and heads to the door, until the little girl begins to feel choked and collapses to the floor. Thinking the food was indeed poisoned, Ophelia starts blaming herself for being careless, while feeling a deep hatred for Kurt Rockens. The mistress rushes to fetch the antidote, but Lies gets up and claims to have been cured for some reason. Indeed, the curse mark had completely disappeared, which leaves Ophelia extremely confused. Without delay, a man in a black robe laments to his boss because the curse was broken and promises to reformulate it. However, his superior tells him that they will not wait for that and have already decided to resort to other means. After all, Lady Lyslot needs to die by any means necessary. In the midst of this, Ophelia visits Mimico given the grave situation and notices the presence of Ulycia, the former adventurer of the royal family. Lady Lyslot removes her hood, and Ulycia and Mimico immediately kneel before the illustrious presence of the third princess. Mimico thought she was ill, but Ophelia explains that the princess was cursed by someone who wanted to take her life, as Lies is the only daughter born between His Royal Majesty and Princess Françoise, the woman he married from the east, from the Gurumaku Empire. Hence, Lyslot's existence is a symbol of peace between these two nations. Ulycia deduces from this that someone wants to destroy this peaceful relationship, and Ophelia adds that, with the end of their nation's war against the northern nation, there are certainly people who would like to provoke another conflict. Mimico gives a joyful hug seeing that the princess is well, and Lies hopes to count on her friends' help to discover who cast the curse on her. About this, Mimico assures her loyalty lies with the princess and her deceased highness, Françoise. Having said that, she is surprised that Lies broke such a powerful curse, and the monarch joyfully shares that it was all thanks to a man named Kurt, which leaves Mimico and Ulycia astonished. In light of the unexpected revelation, it became necessary to explain to the two that the princess had eaten porridge made by Kurt, breaking the powerful curse afflicting her. Regarding the culprit who plotted to take Lady Lyslot's life, considering that it's someone skilled in curses with connections capable of tampering with the palace's curse protections, Mimico has 3 suspects. Sanova Ristkatz, the first general of the Royal Expeditionary Forces, Tristan Maynolf, a bishop of the Poland Church, and Isidora Arkmana, the third queen of His Royal Majesty. Ophelia believes Tristan could have used his followers to tamper with the protections in Lyslot's room. Lies adds that her stepmother, Isidora, can move freely around the royal palace and might very well have interfered with them. On the other hand, she wonders how Sanova could do the same, so Ulycia explains that this general has connections with the Thieves' Guild, which obviously has its ways to enter places they shouldn't, and enough influence to bribe people inside the royal palace. Since it's difficult to pinpoint the culprit at this moment, Ophelia suggests setting a trap to catch this rat. For example, Liz recently turned 15 and became an adult, and tradition dictates that she leave the palace to train for a year. So, the plan is to create a non-existent workshop, run by a fictitious Meister, where Liz will train. Surely, the culprit will start gathering information about the supposed master of this place. Mimiko deduces that if it were someone who really existed, the thieves would collect information quickly. But since he doesn't actually exist, there's nothing to collect, and this bait will confuse the culprit and buy them time to investigate the situation more thoroughly. However, Ophelia says they need to prepare some credentials for this person who will be the fake 8-layer Meister. But Ulysses has just the thing for that, a magic crystal. Ophelia takes the item and is startled by its quality. Then the mine owner reveals that Kurt made it, leaving the master and the princess dumbfounded again. Later, Kurt arrives at the door of Ophelia's workshop and sees a sign that it's temporarily closed due to some unspecified emergency. At that moment, Michelle arrives, so the boy takes the opportunity to ask what happened. She explains that after Kurt left yesterday, her master suddenly went somewhere, and she's sorry that there's no way for the boy to help in the workshop now. Because of this, the poor guy walks away downcast, thinking he made another blunder that got him kicked out of the place. Anyway, his stomach growls, determining it's time to eat, so he heads to a restaurant to ease his hunger with a smile on his face. There, a group of warriors is discussing something at one of the tables. The woman in the trio questions what they will do, as they need to deliver something today. A man replies that he doesn't know, as the doctor said that such a person needs to rest for a week. But without their carrier, they'll have to refuse this order. The problem is they can't afford the cancellation fee, so the girl thinks it's better if they just carry their things. However, her companion reminds her that they will be very vulnerable to attacks if they are loaded down. Kurt overhears the discussion and thinks he could serve as a carrier for these people. Therefore, he brazenly approaches the team and offers to act as a mule for the group, since, although he's a clod in combat, he has an incredible talent for carrying things on his back. The girl dismisses the idea of a kid like that managing the task, but her colleague slaps her on the head and reminds her that she's the same age as this guy. The man apologizes for his sister's behavior, but admits that this job isn't for just anyone, as they are preparing to hunt iron golems that weigh over 200 kilos, and it will take someone with special abilities to carry the necessary items. The only team member who hadn't spoken until then contributes the following statement. That's right. Regardless, Kurt assures them that 200 kilos is nothing for him, so he proposes a challenge. If he can lift the 2 men of the team, that will prove he's the right guy for the job. Without waiting for any of them to agree, Kurt lifts one of the men over his shoulder as if he were a 10-inch statue, leaving the rest of the people dumbfounded. Then he picks up the blonde, who, with his armor, weighs over 150 kilos. Immediately, the restaurant's clientele applauds the spectacle. Having done that, there could be no other outcome. Kurt Rocken proved he was up to the job, so the team sets off on the mission. The armored guy introduces himself as Cans, a heavy warrior. Although he wields a sword, it's practically ornamental, as his own fists speak louder than any blade. The other man introduces himself as Danzo, the samurai who leads this group. Kurt asks what a samurai is, and Danzo explains that it's an oriental variant of a swordsman. Lastly, the girl introduces herself as Sina, a ranger. Cans extends his hand to the new teammate and informs him that the team is called Sakura. He explains that they have another carrier named Bibinok, but he will take a week to recover from a cold. In response, Kurt bows and thanks them for hiring someone ordinary like him, and the reaction from the people is to burst out laughing, confusing the carrier. Cans lightly knocks Kurt on the head and says he counts on him, and the boy only thinks that he must try not to mess up with these cool guys. Later, they arrive at a cave where the mission is to be carried out, but Kurt steps on a slime in the middle of the path and gets his foot stuck in the goo. Sina says it's just a matter of the kid crushing the creature's core, but the carrier is so incompetent in a fight that he manages to stab his own thigh instead of the slime. Out of patience, the ranger sorts out the situation and acknowledges that her colleague warned he was bad at fighting, but what he just did was a spectacular blunder. Still, Cans and Danzo assure him that there's nothing to worry about, as they are the ones who need to fight. Kurt is shocked because his companions didn't get mad at him for failing, since this was routine in his old group. Finally, the quartet enters the cave, and the ranger prepares glowing moss to spread and light the path with a visual spectacle. Kurt points out something he saw along the way, and the girl explains with disgust that it's goblin dung, and by the smell of it, it's still fresh, meaning the monsters aren't far. Kenz asks everyone to stay calm, as they can surely handle 1 or 2 goblins without difficulty. But if it turns out to be a horde, they can always run like the wind. Deeper into the cave, the dungeon begins to resemble ruins as the team progresses. Kurt notices something strange on the wall, but is interrupted by the arrival of a goblin. In that instant, Sina throws a knife into its chest, and Danzo finishes it off with his katana. The problem is that the voices of several similar monsters can be heard in the distance, clearly indicating that there is a whole colony in this location. To make matters worse, they are coming from the entrance, which means one thing: there is no possibility of escape. The Sakura group must fight. Sina knows they stand no chance, but Kurt goes back to the wall where he suspected something and ends up finding a secret passage. However, upon hearing the suggestion to follow Kurt into the passage, only Sina enters and closes the passage behind her. On the other side of the door, Kan says it's impossible to escape so many goblins while looking for a way out, so the two of them must go ahead. Kurt replies that he wants to stay and fight, but Sina, with tears in her eyes, yells that he can't even defeat a slime, and with that attitude, he'll only hinder Kans and Danzo. Hearing her harsh words, the carrier reflects on how much the girl wanted to be fighting alongside her comrades. On the other side, Kans asks Danzo if he regrets their decision, to which he asserts he does not and returns the question. Kans responds that dying to protect his little sister is the highest honor an older brother could have. The samurai concludes that a death without shame is a warrior's pride, and his friend agrees that there is no regret in fighting for their comrades' survival. Kurt overhears the conversation and is astonished to have been accepted as one of them so quickly, although he laments that he can't do anything to help. Anyway, Sina assures that Danzo and his brother will survive, then lights up the secret passage to continue on. But this brings a terrible consequence. At the end of that passage were iron dragon golems. Meanwhile, Ulyssia and Lyslot arrive at the inn where Kurt is staying, and Ulyssia asks the girl to keep from the boy that she is the princess. She agrees and suggests it would be better to be called Lies to avoid formalities, and the elder agrees to be called Yuli. Excited to see the boy who had so charmed her, the princess bursts into his room, but her smile fades as she notices he is not at home. For some reason, Bandana was outside the door and reveals that the boy is in a cave in the northeast with the Sakura group. Yuli rushes to see who it was, but Bandana had disappeared. She fears this could be a trap, but if Kurt is indeed in this cave, and since combat training was recently completed in that region, there are risks of many surviving goblins having fled there. For this reason, Ulyssia decides to search for her companion, while Lies should stay in the city. However, the princess insists on going along. After all, it's not wise to distance oneself from the person you're protecting. Plus, she has learned to use magic as a member of the royal family and can fend for herself. Since that's the case, the protector agrees, but asks that the protected not leave her side at any moment. Some time later, the two arrive at the location where Kurt Rockins is supposedly located. The fresh glowing moss on the walls indicates that someone had indeed passed by recently, and Lies even finds Kurt's footprints, though Yuli has no idea how this girl knows they are his. Further ahead, Lies struggles to identify traces when they reach the ruins, so she activates her heightened senses ability to more effectively detect any trace of the boy's passage. At that moment, she smells the target's scent and runs in a certain direction. And once again, Ulyssia tries to understand how she remembers the scent of that citizen. As she runs toward the smell, the princess hears sounds of a fight in the distance. Then Yuli tells her to stay there and unsheathes her sword, while Lies grants her ally a physical enhancement before she leaves. In the eye of the storm, Kans and Danzo do what they can amid a torrent of enraged goblins until a third fighter appears to change the course of the battle. Inside the secret passage, Sina can't believe the bad luck they had to come face to face with such a creature, and she begins to regret having accepted this mission, as now all her friends are in danger. Feeling guilty, she apologizes to Kurt for having dragged him there. After all, there's no way they can rid themselves of such a threat. Since these iron dragon golems are meant to protect the passages, they will be attacked as soon as they try to cross. In turn, Kurt consoles the girl and stands up to take care of the golems. in front of the terrified girl, who doesn't understand what the heck got into this madman. Rockins approaches the golems, dodges a blow from one of them, and unscrews its tail as if it were a bolt. Then, he does the same with the monster's head, dismantling it piece by sticking his dagger into specific openings in that armor. Once he does this with all the enemies, Cena would love to know what's going on in this place. So Kurt explains that he's used to mining iron golems. Then, Ulysses reaches the two members who entered the secret passage, and the ranger recounts, with terror in her eyes, that the kid dismantled each golem as if he were playing with Lego, and even called it mining. Seeing that her partner has returned, Kurt asks her to help Cans and Danzo, but she reports that the two are alive. Then, she thinks to herself that she had heard legends about a man with a G-level aptitude in combat who, by chance, had an S-level aptitude in harvesting. According to the legends, this man used a scythe to defeat a thorny dragon, and Yuli associates Kurt's case with that legend. Finally, Lyslot arrives soon after, and her eyes sparkle at the unmatched talent of Master Rockins. After the entire team regrouped, Cans lamented not having discovered the potential goblin infestation that might have occurred in the northeast. Regardless, he and Danzo humbly thanked Lady Ulysses for her assistance. In turn, Yuli told Kurt that a new workshop would soon be established, where she would serve as the direct chief adventurer, and that he should consider joining her there. Kurt argued that he was already working with the Sakuras, but Cans emphasized that the boy couldn't afford to miss such an opportunity. Meanwhile, Yuli mentioned that she needed manpower for the workshop and invited the adventurers to join the project. At this, the two men from Sakura celebrated, but Cena remained morose in her corner. Since he was going to the workshop, Ulysses asked Kurt to take an aptitude test when they returned. With the mission resolved, everyone returned to the city, and Kurt went to the Hallow workstation, where he was greeted by Mimiko. She introduced herself as a mage of the royal court and was responsible for administering Kurt's aptitude test. She remarked that she had seen his magic crystal before, but she needed to meet the creator of that work in person. That evening, the Sakura group celebrated the successful mission and the invitation to the workshop, with the distinguished Lyslot present, although Cena remained downcast for some reason. Turning back to Mimiko, she informed Ulysses that Rockins had the following aptitudes: B rank in cleaning, cooking, and mining, and C rank for everything else. Yuli asked what the actual results were, and the mage explained that the workstation could only measure talents from G to SS ranks, meaning anything beyond its measuring capability was ranked SSS, and that was the case with this boy. Moreover, even his latent magical power was much greater than that of the royal court mage. Yuli had her suspicions, but this was proof that he was the right person to be the secret Atelier Meister. Mimiko stressed how fortunate it was that she conducted the test, because if someone else had, the information could have leaked. With that, Kershaw appeared shocked upon seeing Rockins' results on the table. Mimiko and Yuli pretended they had just discovered this as well, and noted how dangerous it would be if someone outside knew about it. So the employee covered her ears and shouted that she hadn't heard anything. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.